Hi everyone, welcome back. We're going to continue on now with the next stage of our production. We're going to start creating the material shaders that we're going to apply onto our model. We're going to be using the textures that we created in Photoshop in the last stage to add more detail to those materials. So you can see here I've got my my can model. And what we're going to do is basically add a new material onto this. So we're going to replace this checkerboard pattern with a brand new material. So I'm going to select everything, the rivet, the ring pull, and the can. And holding the right mouse button down on the object, I'm going to come down to assign favorite material, and I'm going to select a blin. Hopefully, for you guys, it will open up the attribute editor, and you just need to make sure that you're on this blin tab that we've just created. And I'm going to rename this can shader. There we go. Now what we're going to be doing is adding several nodes into the can material just here, this can shader that we've just created, and we'll be making some adjustments to the settings. So the first thing I want to do is I want to come down to the eccentricity setting, which is just down here, eccentricity, and I want to change that to 0.1. I want to change the specular roll-off to a maximum value, which is 1 in this case. Oftentimes you can actually type in higher numbers, like if I type in 2, you can see it actually accepts a higher value than the slider goes to, and it rescales the slider. But in this case I just want to set it to 1. So, but just be aware you can sometimes make some of these sliders go higher by typing in a higher number. Okay, specular color, I want to increase that almost all the way up for white, like that. And we might play around with the diffuse level a bit later on. Usually with metallic objects, normally you would often reduce the diffuse quite a fair way. Basically, it's almost like it's essentially a setting that dictates how much light is absorbed by the material, and the result of that is that it's almost like a brightness setting. And generally speaking, metallic objects actually have a low diffuse value, and the brightness of the metal that you see is actually caused by reflections in the environment around the object. So you're not actually seeing a bright material, what you're seeing is a very reflective material. So we might play around with the diffuse value later on down the track and see whether or not we can kind of get a nice result from that. Okay, so we're going to start adding extra nodes into our material. And to sort of see what's happening, I'm going to open up the Hypershade perspective view over here on the left hand side from my presets. And we don't necessarily need to use this, but I just want to kind of show you guys what's happening with the changes that we make over here. So you can see our can shaders up here in the list. Okay, so I'm going to select that, and I'm going to come up to Graph, Input Connections. Now at the moment we haven't got any other nodes plugged into this at all, so it's just the one node by itself here at the moment, this material node. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, oops, I'll just select the shader again. If you deselect this, basically it'll just blank this panel out, so just click on your can shader if you accidentally deselect it. So the first thing we want to do is add in our label. Now in order to do that, there's one setting that I'm going to change for a second. Okay, and this is to do with the render settings. I'm going to click on this little render settings button just here, and what I want to do is set this to render using mental ray just here. Now if mental ray doesn't show up in the list, you'll need to come down to Window, Settings Preferences, Plugin Manager, and you'll need to go down the list. I think in this version it's still in the list up here. The one that you want is Maya to mr.mml. Just make sure both of those are ticked, and it will load in. In Maya 2013, they actually shifted it down here, sort of near this bottom category. So it'll actually be separated out into its own category in newer versions than this. Keeping in mind that I'm in Maya 2012 for this project. So just make sure it's ticked and that'll load in. So now that I'm rendering using Mental Ray, I can just turn that off. Now the reason that I need to set that is that the one of the nodes that we're using, that we're going to add in a second, is actually a Mental Ray node. It only works if you're using Mental Ray as your renderer. So I just wanted to kind of get that set up first. Okay, so let's add a node into the color channel. So I'm going to click on the input for color. And what I want to do is add in an ambient occlusion node. And what this is going to do is it's going to add dark areas in all of the little seams and little kind of cracks and underneath the ring pull and so on. It's almost like it adds a little bit of shadow underneath. And the result that that has is that it actually makes the details of the model stand out a little bit more and gives it a nicer look. So we're going to come down to textures down here under Mental Ray. And we're going to select MIB AMB, which is short for Ambient Occlusion. And we'll add that. So the two main settings for this are the bright and dark values. Now, the bright value is the color that the object usually is, and the dark value is the color of the shadow or the dirt that you want in the in all of the joins. So for us, the bright value is going to be the label that we made for the can, the color texture that we made in Photoshop. So I'm going to click on this, input, and select File. And then from the image name folder, I'm going to select, now this is different. What I need to do here, it's taking me to a different folder than it did last time. What we need to do is make sure we're in source images, okay? And the file that we're after is the can color. So I'll just hit open there. Now you'll notice over here that it's actually loading in the wrong location. I find that when you're loading in materials or texture maps into this ambient occlusion node, it never displays them properly. It makes them kind of go really sort of crazy like this. But if I just click a quick render, I'm just going to see, you can see there that it's actually showing up correctly on the model. In the right location. So it seems to be okay at the moment. As far as placement, it won't show up correctly in the viewport because the viewport's not able to translate a texture image running through the ambient occlusion. So the ambient occlusion is what's called a procedural texture. It's a calculated kind of texture effect that's generated by the software when you do your render. Whereas this image file, this image file that we created in Photoshop is a texture map. So that they're two different ways of adding kind of color to your model, but one's generated by Maya and the other one's just a picture that you've imported into Maya. All right, so I've just got to get back across to that ambient occlusion setting. So I'm just going to click on the go to output button just here, and it'll take me one kind of level back. So this is the ambient occlusion node now. You can technically just select the ambient occlusion node down here in your work area, and that will bring the settings up. So what I want to do is maybe set the samples to about 64. Usually you want to keep these this samples value to a power of 2 number, so that's going to be 2, 4, 16, 32, 64, 90, no, not 90, well, 96, I suppose. 128, 256, 512, or whatever. Don't go too high. I probably wouldn't go past maybe 96 or 128 for that. The higher the number of samples you generally have for any of your sample settings, the longer your renders take to do, so you don't want to crank this up too high. The dark value we can leave as is. Basically, this is going to add black kind of shadowed areas into the gaps and so on, and under the ring pull. The maximum distance, or the spread, I should say, the spread is basically the distance that the shadowing takes effect across, and it's in grid spacings. So you know, for this, I don't want really huge kind of dark shadows coming across. So what I might do is actually reduce that to maybe about 0.3, 0.4, something like that. The maximum distance is the distance in which polygons that are close to, together will actually cause this effect to occur. So where you've got, say here, we've got polygons here and polygons here, and there's kind of like this recess in between them. If these polygons are within the number that you set here, it will cause the recess to basically have this dark color applied to it. So basically you'll get a shadow or what looks like built up dirt in that gap. Now if you set the max distance to 0, it basically sets it to unlimited distance. So what that means is it doesn't matter how far away two polygons are, they will try and cause the effect to occur. So what I like to do is maybe set it to about 1 grid space, or 1 grid unit, I should say. So usually what I'll do is set this to about 1. Now if the model was colossal and the grid was tiny, I would actually set that to a much higher number. So it should be fine on about 1. We can set it up as reflective, so it should take reflections into account. We've got a reflective object, it's metal, so that should be fine. Pretty much everything else you can leave as is. So what that's going to do is basically add dirt into, or kind of what looks like dirt, or kind of more shaded areas, darker areas, anywhere polygons are very close together next to one another. So it'll be sort of like under the ring pull, you'll kind of see like a little kind of shadowy, darker bit under the ring pull on the surface of the can, and also down in this section here. And you'll probably also see some under this little lip just here. So this little section in here should go dark on the render. Okay, so that's the color channel pretty much sorted. The next thing that we want to do is go back out to the main shader. So I'm going to click on here. Now because we've got the ambient occlusion node plugged in, it's not going to display the shader thumbnail properly. It always gives it this kind of glitched out look. Usually if you've got just ambient occlusion by itself, it'll either give you black or like a black or white thumbnail shader, because it doesn't know which, you know, obviously it's trying to load in both black and white for the dark and bright values. As soon as you plug a picture into one of them, it then scrambles it up like this. So we can't really use this as to get an idea of what the material looks like. We'll probably have to do some test renders as we work. Okay, the next thing I want to do is do bump mapping. So that's going to be over here in the bump mapping channel. So I'm going to click on the input, and I want to select file because we created a file in Photoshop for this. And at this point you need to choose whether or not you're going to use a bump map, which is the black and white image that we created. For those of you that did the optional video where we created a normal map, for those of you that had a PC at home and you wanted to install that Photoshop plugin, if you want, you can actually use the normal map that we created from that. And in order to do that, you have to set use as to tangent space normals. Okay, if you're just using the bump map version, the black and white one, just leave it on bump map. The bump depth value is the control of how much of that bump you get. So it's almost like a strength value. If you set this to 0, the bump disappears entirely. So you can kind of come back into this node, and it's this bump 2D node here in the hypershade. You can come back in here and adjust that if you find that the bump isn't strong enough or it's too strong. To load the bump map in, we go to bump value and we go into the input just here, and it's already set up with a file ready to go. And next to image name, we click the folder and we select our bump map or our normal map, depending on which one we want to use. I'm going to use the normal map because I created one in the extra video. Okay, so there it is. Now it's not going to show up on here. Usually if you don't have one of those ambient occlusion nodes plugged in, normally what you can do is go render a viewport 2.0 and it'll actually show up. Now this is showing up, the bump is showing up. If I rotate this around, you can actually see the effect that that's having, but we can't see the texture because the ambient occlusion node's blocking the color. So you can actually see the bump occurring in there. You can see this detail. Now I've just noticed that the letters, the text here is actually backwards. So that's possibly going to mean that this object's polygons are flipped inside out. And that's probably occurred because we used a NURBS object to create the can originally. So what I'm going to do, we better fix that now. So if you notice that your text is coming out backwards, we might do just a quick render here. I'm just going to click this clapperboard button, and it'll do a quick render of the object. There it is. So this is what we're sort of seeing at the moment. You can see that the text is clearly backwards. So I'm going to select the can, and I'm going to come up to, I've got my polygon menu set selected. I'm going to come up to normals, and I'm going to select reverse. Okay, and you'll see that all the polygons select like this. What that's done is it's flipped all the polygons inside out. Now I'm hoping that that's going to be enough to fix the issue. So if I do another render, I can just press the little clapperboard render button here. Okay, it looks like they're still out the other way around. So the other thing we can do is check the UV map. So I'm going to select the can again and open up my UV texture editor. And if I click this button just here, it'll toggle this. Now, the last time when we created the template originally, the template was actually blue. Now, when I flip the polygons just before using that reverse tool, it's flipped these inside out. So if we now select this region using the Move UV Shell tool, we'll just click this and then press this Flip U Direction button. Okay, that's for the label down there. I'll also do the same for the other regions as well. So I'll select this bottom piece and I'll flip that in the U direction. And this one here is the one that should actually flip this around. Yeah, I just saw that move then. And if I have a look at that there, yes, it's definitely the right way around now. So in order to get all of that to work, basically what I had to do was turn the polygons the right way around and then flip the UV map. And I'll just kind of flip these ones as well, this strip along the middle, just for completeness sake, because they're sort of backwards on the template as well. So if you need to do that, that's how you fix your textures from being kind of backwards. And then I can just select object mode and turn this off. I'll do another quick render just to see what's occurring there. Yeah, so now we can see those that text is actually the right way around now. So that's sort of fixed that backwards texture look. So just as a little side note, we can see in here we've got kind of this pale area and then this kind of little kind of softened shadow. That's the ambient occlusion working on the top of the can. Okay, so the ring pull's casting like a little bit of a darkened area on the top of the can. Okay, so that's a little just a little side thing that we had to fix there. I'm just going to grab my can shader again. So you can see there that the bump mapping, I should have pointed that out. So that's the bump mapping effect, or the normal map, causing this detail to appear. All right, and we've also got, you can see the that little recess there in the top of the can. So that's the actual normal map or the bump map doing that. And as I said before, like if I go into that input just here, the bump depth controls how much of that appears. So like if I set that to say 0.1 and then I do another quick render, what we should see is a much reduced, we should see like a much more reduced effect. Okay, I've moved the can a bit, so it's a bit difficult to kind of get the gist of that. So what I might do is now set that back up to 1, and I've stored that image there, and I'll just do another quick render just to show you guys if there's you know, we can see if there's a difference. Alright, that's not showing up a difference. Normally you would expect that the actual amount of bump would change. Now that might be because I'm using, you can actually see it changing over here, but that might be because I'm using a normal map, and the normal map might override this value. You can see there I've got it set to 0, but it's still showing up. With a bump map, it should actually change. But I think with the normal map is the thing that's actually determining the overall scale of the effect. So the normal map kind of gives, it appears to be taking away that control. But we don't need to worry about that anyway. I'm just going to leave that at 1. Okay. So I'm going to leave this video here. In the next video, we're going to continue on and just add in a little bit more detail to our can. So I'll see you then.